6 months after losing my beloved Arthur, my daughter-in-law Clara suddenly invited me to lunch. It was a rare gesture, but soon I realized her true motive, a cold, calculated attempt to steal my late husband's life insurance. They even brought the banker to the table. I kept my composure, excused myself, and by the time I returned, their scheme was entirely foiled. Her face was priceless. Stick around to hear this incredible story. Like, share, and let me know where you are listening from. The chime of my phone startled me. A text from Clara, David's wife. Lunch tomorrow? My treat. I stared at the message, a faint frown creasing my brow. 8 years David and Clara had been married, and in all that time, an invitation like this was practically unheard of. Our interactions were typically limited to holidays, carefully orchestrated and often brief, filled with a polite distance that felt more like a chasm. 6 months had passed since Arthur, my dear husband, had died, and Clara had offered little beyond a perfunctory condolence card. She hadn't called, hadn't visited, hadn't done any of the things a daughter-in-law might do for a grieving mother-in-law. No, it was my niece, Sarah, who had been my rock. Sarah, who lived states away but called me every evening, who listened patiently to my rambling stories about Arthur, who sent care packages and reminded me to eat. She was the one who pulled me out of the deepest pits of my sorrow, her unwavering love a beacon in my grief. Clara's sudden invitation felt off, but a small, hopeful part of me wondered if perhaps, finally, she was reaching out. Perhaps she was ready to acknowledge me, not just as David's mother, but as a person. I replied with a cautious yes. The next day, Clara had chosen the Magnolia Room, the most exclusive and expensive restaurant in town. Its opulent decor, hushed atmosphere, and white-glove service were a stark contrast to Clara's usual preference for trendy, bustling bistros. The choice alone raised a red flag. As we were seated, I noticed Clara seemed unusually radiant, her smile a little too wide, her gaze a little too eager. Over appetizers, a delicate crab salad that tasted like sea air, Clara launched into a monologue about her life, her recent promotion at the marketing firm, David's latest achievement at work, their plans for a lavish vacation to the Mediterranean, the new designer handbag she just splurged on. She spoke animatedly, her hands gesturing gracefully, her eyes occasionally darting to gauge my reaction. Yet, not once did she pause to ask how I was coping. Not a single inquiry about my health, my grief, or the gaping void Arthur had left in my life. It was as if my world had stood still while hers had accelerated, and I was merely an audience member to her triumphant narrative. A familiar bitterness began to curdle in my stomach, replacing the fleeting hope I'd felt. Then, casually, almost too casually, she leaned forward. "Oh, it's funny," she began, a conspiratorial glint in her eyes. "I ran into Mr. Davies, Arthur's banker, at the country club last week. What a coincidence, right?" My internal alarm bells began to clang. Mr. Davies, Arthur's banker. The name alone brought a fresh wave of grief mixed with a sudden, icy suspicion. Arthur had meticulously handled all our finances, and since his passing, I had been in regular contact with Mr. Davies. Or rather, he had been in regular contact with me. He'd guided me through the initial paperwork, the transferring of accounts, everything. And not once had he mentioned running into Clara, nor had he attempted to contact me in the past week. Clara's coincidence was a carefully constructed lie. My guard went up instantly. I simply nodded, a neutral expression masking the whirlwind of thoughts into my mind. Clara, oblivious to my growing unease, continued smoothly. He mentioned something about some final documents for Arthur's life insurance policy. Said you just needed to sign them to release the funds. Just a formality, really. I told him I was having lunch with you today, and he said he might swing by. A sudden chill ran through me, despite the warmth of the elegant dining room. Release the funds, just a formality. Arthur's life insurance. It was a substantial policy intended to secure my future. I had seen the paperwork, understood the terms. There was no release needed. The funds had been transferred to my account months ago, following all necessary protocols. This wasn't a formality. This was a trap. As if on cue, just as the waiter placed our dessert, a delicate lavender panna cotta, on the table, a tall, impeccably dressed man approached. Mr. Davies. He carried a slim, leather briefcase. Mrs. Miller? Clara, he greeted, his smile practiced, his eyes a little too bright. What a pleasure to see you both. He pulled up a chair and settled in, his presence immediately shifting the atmosphere from polite lunch to something far more formal, far more predatory. He launched into his spiel, his voice smooth and reassuring. Yes, Mrs. Miller, just a small matter regarding Arthur's life insurance. A formality, really. You see, with policies of this size, there are often protocols about family access and co-management. We just need your signature on a few documents to ensure everything is in order and that the funds are properly dispersed. He opened his briefcase, revealing a stack of papers and a pen. Arthur was a very prudent man, a very generous man. This policy, a substantial $750,000, is a testament to his foresight. My heart pounded, a frantic drum against my ribs. $750,000. The full amount he specified. It became terrifyingly clear. David and Clara, my own son and his wife, were trying to trick me. They wanted me to sign away my financial security, the very legacy Arthur had left for me. My mind raced, piecing together Clara's unusual invitation, the expensive restaurant, her lack of empathy, the fabricated coincidence, and now the banker's convenient appearance with his deceptive talk of formalities. The betrayal was a physical ache, a sharp, cold jab in my chest. My hands began to tremble, almost imperceptibly, as I pushed my untouched panna cotta away. Excuse me, I managed, my voice a little shaky. I just need to use the restroom. I practically fled to the ladies' room, my vision blurring slightly. Inside, I splashed cold water on my face, trying to calm the frantic beating of my heart. My reflection stared back, pale and shocked. No, I wouldn't let them do this. Arthur had worked his entire life to provide for me, and I wouldn't let his legacy be stolen by their greed. My hands were still trembling, but a fierce resolve began to solidify within me. I pulled out my phone, my fingers fumbling slightly, and called Sarah. She answered on the second ring, her voice warm and familiar. Aunt Eleanor, is everything all right? Sarah, I whispered, trying to keep my voice steady. No, it's not. Clara and Mr. Davies are here, trying to get me to sign away Arthur's life insurance. They think I don't know. I quickly explained the situation, the hurried words tumbling out. I need your help. Can you open a new account? Right now, I need to transfer the money. There was a moment of stunned silence on Sarah's end, followed by a sharp intake of breath. Aunt Eleanor, that's despicable. Yes, of course I can. Give me 5 minutes. Are you safe? Yes, I'm safe, I assured her. Just hurry. I waited, pacing the small restroom, my phone clutched tight. When Sarah called back, her voice was urgent. Okay, Aunt Eleanor, it's done. I've set up a new savings account, completely separate. I'm sending you the details now. Just transfer everything over, immediately. My fingers flew across the screen, navigating my banking app. I found Arthur's life insurance fund, still sitting there, waiting. I entered the account details Charo had sent, confirmed the amount, $750,000, and with a silent prayer, I hit transfer. A confirmation message flashed on the screen. Transaction successful. My heart, which had been racing, suddenly felt lighter, even as a cold anger simmered beneath the surface. I took a deep breath, smoothed my dress, and returned to the table. Clara and Mr. Davies were still there, dessert untouched, a predatory anticipation in their eyes. Mr. Davies gestured to the papers. Ready, Mrs. Miller? He asked, his smile widening. I sat down, a serene calm settling over me, a feeling of strength I hadn't felt since Arthur passed. I met their gazes, one after the other. Oh, there's no need for these documents, Mr. Davies, I said, my voice clear and steady, and no need to release any funds. Clara frowned, a flicker of confusion crossing her face. What do you mean, Mother Eleanor? I leaned forward slightly, my eyes unwavering. I mean, I stated calmly, that the funds have already been allocated, just a few minutes ago, in fact. I paused for effect, letting the words hang in the air. To my niece, Sarah, the entire life insurance amount. The silence that followed was deafening. Clara's face, usually so composed, contorted through a series of rapid emotions. Confusion, then disbelief, then a slow, burning fury that spread like wildfire. Her mouth opened and closed soundlessly, like a fish out of water. Mr. Davies, on the other hand, went utterly pale, his practiced smile crumbling, replaced by a look of sheer panicked shock. As their carefully constructed scheme imploded before their very eyes, I felt a long-lost strength return to my bones, a sense of justice that was both profound and deeply satisfying. I had barely stepped through my front door, the lingering taste of lavender panna cotta and bitter betrayal still on my tongue, when a furious pounding erupted. The insistent thumps vibrated through the quiet house, rattling the framed photographs of Arthur and me smiling in happier times. I didn't need to check the peephole to know who it was. Their fury was palpable, even through the thick oak. "Mom, open up, now!" David's voice, usually calm and measured, was raw with rage, muffled but unmistakable. I took a deep breath, trying to steady myself. The trembling in my hands, which had subsided after the transfer, returned with renewed force. But beneath it, a core of steel remained. I had faced their deception, now I would face their wrath. I unlocked the door, slowly, deliberately. David burst in, Clara right behind him, her face a mask of furious indignation. "What the hell were you thinking, Mom?" David roared, his face flushed, eyes blazing. He didn't wait for me to fully open the door, practically shouldering his way past me. "Transferring Dad's money to Sarah. Are you out of your mind?" I looked at him, my only son, the boy I had raised, and saw only a stranger consumed by greed. "Hello, David." "Clara, see," I said, my voice calm, almost detached, a stark contrast to his frenzy. "Won't you come in?" I walked into the living room, leaving them to follow or stand in the hallway, the implicit invitation a subtle assertion of control. David stood in the archway, his chest heaving. "What do you mean? What was I thinking? You've just given away Dad's entire life insurance. To Sarah, a distant niece." "Sarah is family, David," I replied, turning to face him. My gaze was steady. "The money is with family. It's exactly where Arthur would have wanted it to be. Safe." Clara, ever the strategist, stepped forward, her voice a little softer, laced with a feigned concern. "Mother Eleanor, with all due respect, are you feeling well? Are you thinking clearly? That money, Arthur's legacy, it belongs with David, your direct family. He's your son, your only child. Surely you must see that." Her tone was cloying, a thin veneer of sweetness over a core of sharp accusation. I gestured to the sofa. "Please, sit down, both of you." They hesitated, but I held their gaze, and eventually they complied, though David perched on the edge, ready to spring. I settled into my armchair, the worn fabric a comfort against my back. "The money," I repeated, "is exactly where Arthur wanted it to be. It is safe." David stood up again, beginning to pace restlessly across my Persian rug. "No, that's not true, Mom. Dad would never have wanted his money to go to Sarah. He would have wanted it to provide for his son, his family." He punctuated his words with agitated gestures. "He worked his whole life for that money. For us." "He worked his whole life," I corrected gently, "to provide for me, to ensure my security after he was gone. And that is precisely what it's doing." I watched him, my heart aching with a complex mix of sadness and anger. He was so consumed by his perceived entitlement, so blind to the reality of the situation. David stopped pacing, his eyes narrowed. "Is this about us not visiting enough, Mom? Is this some kind of punishment?" His voice was laced with an accusation that stung, not because it was true, but because it twisted the truth into something ugly. "It's not punishment, David," I said, shaking my head. "It's protection, my protection." My gaze shifted between him and Clara, taking in their incredulous expressions. "And it's also protection for Arthur's legacy, because I know the kind of debt you're in." The color drained from David's face, leaving him ashen. Clara's mouth, which had been opened to retort, snapped shut. A sudden, tense silence fell over the room, broken only by the distant tick-tock of my grandfather clock. "What are you talking about, Mom?" David finally managed, his voice barely a whisper. He looked at Clara, then back at me, a desperate, cornered look in his eyes. The papers Mr. Davies brought to the restaurant, I continued, my voice gaining strength. They weren't for releasing funds or co-management. They were to set up a joint account with your name on it, David. And I knew that because I also knew what you were planning to do with that money. He stared at me, dumbfounded. He hadn't expected me to be so informed, so prepared. How, how could you possibly know that? My dear friend, Mrs. Hayes, I explained, a small, sad smile touching my lips. She works at your bank, David. She knows everything that goes on, and she knows you've been trying to take out a third mortgage on your house. She called me, concerned. David slumped onto the sofa, running a hand through his hair. The bravado, the anger, all of it deflated, replaced by a crushing weariness. A third mortgage? Clara gasped, looking at her husband with dawning horror. David, what is she talking about? He closed his eyes, a defeated sigh escaping his lips. It's true, the investments. They went south, Clara, all of them. And we've been living beyond our means, trying to keep up appearances. We're in over $400,000 of debt. 430,000 to be exact. Clara let out a small shriek, her perfectly manicured hand flying to her mouth. 430,000? David, you told me it was manageable. You told me it was just a temporary setback. Her voice rose in pitch, betraying the cracks in her carefully constructed facade. It wasn't temporary, David muttered, his gaze fixed on the floor. And it wasn't manageable. Not anymore. That's why we needed Dad's money, to bail us out. We thought you wouldn't need it all, Mom. Not really. You have your pension. The house is paid off. My pension is modest, David, I interrupted, my voice sharp. And this house, your father's house, is all I have left. Arthur left that money specifically for my financial security, not to fund your bad investments or your extravagant lifestyle. Clara recovered quickly, her eyes now gleaming with desperation. Mother Eleanor, please, she pleaded, her voice saccharine once more. You have to reverse the transfer. You have to. We're facing ruin. This is our last hope. I met her gaze, then David's. I shook my head slowly, deliberately. That's not happening, Clara. David looked up, his face etched with pain, but also a chilling coldness. If you don't help us with this, Mom, if you let us lose everything, I don't think I can ever forgive that. The threat hung heavy in the air, cold and unforgiving. A wave of despair washed over me, a profound sadness that cut deeper than any anger. This wasn't about money anymore. It was about the destruction of a family, a relationship poisoned by greed and betrayal. I looked at my son, the boy who once held my hand so tightly, and realized he was gone. In his place stood a stranger, willing to sever ties over a desperate gamble. My voice, though trembling slightly, held firm. Then I guess this is goodbye, David. He stared at me, a flicker of something unreadable in his eyes, before he pushed himself off the sofa. Clara, her face pale with fury and despair, followed him. They stormed out of my house as quickly as they had entered, the front door slamming shut with a resounding thud that echoed through the sudden silence. I was left alone, trembling, but resolute. The slamming door had marked the end of an era, a final, painful severing. 2 weeks stretched into a month of absolute silence. No phone calls, no conciliatory texts, no unexpected visits from David or Clara. Even my grandchildren, whom I adored, remained absent, a silent consequence of their parents' fury. It was as if I had vanished from their lives, deemed unworthy of contact. The quiet of the house, which had once been a gentle companion to my grief, now felt heavy, burdened with absence. In this emotional void, Sarah became my lifeline. She called me twice a day, every day, her voice a comforting balm. She listened, she advised, she shared anecdotes from her own busy life, reminding me that the world outside my four walls was still turning. Her consistent presence was a stark contrast to David and Clara's utter abandonment. One afternoon, seeking solace and distraction, I found myself drawn to Arthur's study. It was a room I had barely entered since his passing, too raw with his presence, too painful a reminder of what I had lost. But today, a quiet determination propelled me forward. I needed to sort through things, to face the lingering echoes of his life. The scent of old paper and leather filled the air, a bittersweet perfume. I started with the books, meticulously dusting the spines of his beloved first editions and weighty financial tomes. As my hand ran along a row of worn volumes, my fingers brushed against something unexpected. Wedged between a book on market trends and a volume of Shakespeare. It was a plain, unassuming blue leather photo album, one I had never seen before. Its cover was smooth, unembellished, and it felt heavy in my hands. A tremor of curiosity tinged with apprehension ran through me. Had Arthur kept secrets? I opened it, my heart a little faster. The first few pages were filled with familiar photographs of David, a chubby-cheeked toddler, a gap-toothed schoolboy, a grinning teenager at graduation. A wave of nostalgia washed over me, a pang for the carefree days when our family was simpler, unbroken. But as I continued to flip, a subtle pattern emerged. There were fewer photos of David in his adult years, and in the ones that included Clara, I noticed something disquieting. Arthur's smile, while present, never quite reached his eyes. There was a faint tension around his mouth, a stiffness in his posture that I, in my love blindness, had never noticed before. It was as if a part of him was always holding back, always guarded. Then, tucked into various pages, I found them. Small, neat post-it notes in Arthur's distinctive, elegant handwriting. They weren't attached to specific photos, but rather placed near certain periods in David's life. David requested $20,000 for business venture. No details provided. Another read, David requested $50,000 for urgent debt. Vague explanation. And then a more recent one dated just a year ago. Clara inquiring about retirement accounts, asking about specific beneficiaries. A cold knot formed in my stomach. A wave of realization, stark and chilling, washed over me. Arthur hadn't just been a loving husband, he had been a meticulous documentarian. He had been quietly, diligently recording a pattern of manipulation, of requests for money, of subtle probings into our finances that I, in my innocent trust, had been too blind to see. He had been protecting me even then. I was still sitting there, the album open on my lap, when a knock at the front door pulled me from my reverie. It was Brenda, my neighbor, a kind woman with a keen ear for local gossip. Her face was etched with concern. "Eleanor, honey, are you all right?" she asked, stepping inside. "I just wanted to check in. I heard some things." "What things, Brenda?" I asked, a sense of dread rising. She wrung her hands. "David and Clara, they're telling people, they're saying you're confused, that since Arthur passed, you've been making poor decisions, that you gave away Arthur's money because you're not of sound mind." Her eyes were full of sympathy, but her words felt like a fresh betrayal. They were trying to discredit me, to paint me as an incompetent widow, paving the way for, what? Legal action, to regain the money? I felt a fresh surge of anger, but also a new sense of clarity. They were indeed coming for me. As soon as Brenda left, I returned to the album, my hands shaking with a mixture of fury and a strange, dawning respect for Arthur. I flipped to the very last page, a blank one, and there it was, a sealed envelope, taped securely, addressed to me in Arthur's familiar hand. My dearest Eleanor. My breath hitched. I carefully peeled it off, tearing open the flap. Inside, a single sheet of paper, folded precisely. The date at the top read, 2 weeks before his heart attack. I began to read, my eyes blurring as tears welled up. My dearest Eleanor, there are things I've protected you from, secrets I've kept, not out of malice, but out of a misguided desire to shield you from unpleasantness. But perhaps I've been wrong to do so. Our son, David, has changed. His financial dealings have become increasingly reckless, and his requests for money, always vaguely explained, have become more frequent and substantial. He has repaid almost none of what he has borrowed from us over the years, and I fear he has amassed considerable personal debt. Clara, too, has shown a troubling interest in our finances, particularly your retirement accounts and the life insurance policy. Her questions are always couched in concern, but her intentions, I suspect, are less pure. I have seen the way they look at our resources, Eleanor, not as a safety net, but as an endless well from which to draw. I've heard the whispers, caught the glances. They believe, I think, that your inheritance or life savings is their birthright to control. Because of this, I've taken steps. I've made our will and the life insurance policy as ironclad as legally possible, ensuring that every penny, particularly the life insurance, is solely for your benefit to secure your future. I've also spoken at length with Sarah. She is sharp, intelligent, and fiercely loyal. She knows what to do if they try anything after I'm gone. Trust her, Eleanor. She will be there for you when others are not. I've arranged things to protect you, my love. I pray you never have to face what I fear. But if you do, know that you are stronger than you know. Stand firm. You are worthy of everything we've built together. All my love, Arthur. Tears streamed down my face, hot and salty, blurring the words on the page. Arthur, my Arthur. Even in death, he was still protecting me, still guiding me. He had seen it all, had known their intentions, and had prepared for this very moment. He had trusted Sarah, and now I knew why. He had known I would need her. The letter was a bittersweet gift, a final act of love, but also a heavy burden. It laid bare the depths of David and Clara's greed, confirming my worst fears. But more than that, it ignited a new kind of fire within me, a profound sadness mingled with a fierce resolve. I was not a confused, incompetent widow. I was Arthur's wife, and I was strong. If David and Clara wanted a war over money, they would discover that I was not defenseless, and I was certainly not alone. I had Arthur's foresight, Sarah's unwavering support, and a newfound determination to protect what was rightfully mine. 2 months slipped by in a blur of quiet days and long nights. The silence from David and Clara remained absolute, a heavy weight that settled over the house. Sarah, however, continued her twice-daily calls, often sharing news from the outside world. It was through her that I learned the rumors were still circulating, growing more insidious. Widow's dementia, some were calling it. The hushed whispers about my confused state and poor decisions since Arthur's death. It infuriated me, but it also spurred me on, reminding me of the battle ahead. I found myself increasingly drawn to Arthur's study, a room that had become both a sanctuary and a trove of his lingering presence. I spent hours there, sometimes just sitting, sometimes sorting through his papers, feeling a strange comfort in the order he had always maintained. One afternoon, while meticulously cleaning the bottom drawer of his large mahogany desk, my fingers brushed against a subtle ridge. Pressing gently, a section of the drawer's base suddenly clicked inward, revealing a shallow, hidden compartment. My heart gave a surprised leap. Arthur had always loved small, clever puzzles, but I never knew he had one built into his own desk. Inside, nestled snugly, was a leather-bound journal. It was a surprising discovery. Arthur was never one for journaling, preferring to organize his thoughts in spreadsheets or meticulously written notes. This was different. This felt personal. The leather was worn smooth, suggesting it had been handled often. I opened it, a mix of reverence and trepidation washing over me. The first entry, dated 5 years prior, was written in his familiar, precise hand. It read, "I've started this record on attorney Mr. Caldwell's advice. He says I need documentation. I hope to God he's wrong about David and Clara, but I fear he isn't." My breath hitched. Mr. Caldwell was Arthur's trusted attorney, a man known for his discretion and sharp legal mind. The entry sent a chill down my spine. It was a testament to how long Arthur had been observing, how deeply he had been concerned. As I turned the pages, I realized the journal was a meticulous, heartbreaking chronicle of David and Clara's increasing financial demands. Arthur had documented every single request. David called, urgent, investment opportunity, needs $30,000 immediately, no details provided. Clara insinuated we should help out more with their mortgage payment, saying David's business wasn't doing well. Refused David's request for another loan for car repairs. His reaction was surprisingly cold. Each entry was stark, factual, devoid of emotion, yet the cumulative effect was devastating. Arthur had recorded their subtle manipulations, their veiled pressures, their reactions when he said no. He had watched, and he had learned, protecting me all the while. He had seen the slow, creeping entitlement that I, blinded by a mother's love and a wife's trust, had missed. One entry, dated just 8 months before his death, made my blood run cold. Clara asked pointed questions about our life insurance today. Specifically, she asked about beneficiaries and payout structures. The way she looked at me, a calculated glint in her eyes, made my blood run cold. She saw money, not family. This entry confirmed every suspicion I'd had about the lunch at the Magnolia Room. Arthur had known. The most recent entry, 2 weeks before his heart attack, detailed Arthur's proactive steps. Met with Mr. Davies today, changed the policy structure. It's now solely Eleanor's, absolutely ironclad. No one else can access it without her express permission, and even then only to release funds to her personal account. Also planning to finalize will adjustments with Mr. Caldwell next week to ensure Eleanor's complete financial security. My eyes widened. He had foreseen it all. He had actively worked to protect me, but the journal wasn't finished. On the very next page, there was a list of account numbers, passwords, and a small bolded note. Sarah knows about these changes. She'll help Eleanor navigate this when the time comes. Trust her, my love. A profound realization washed over me, a feeling of awe and utter vindication. My impulsive decision to transfer the life insurance money to Sarah's account that day at the restaurant hadn't been impulsive at all. It had been the exact fulfillment of Arthur's carefully laid, meticulously documented plan. He had guided me, even from beyond the grave, through Sarah. He had placed his trust in her, and she had proven worthy of it. Later that week, an unexpected visitor arrived. Clara's mother, Margaret. She stood on my porch, her face a carefully constructed mosaic of concern and judgment. "Eleanor," she began, her voice brittle, "I've come to speak with you. I've been hearing things about David and Clara's struggles and about your unusual behavior. People at the country club are talking. They say you've become confused since Arthur passed." I invited her in, leading her to the living room. "Margaret," and I said, my voice calm but firm, "sit down. Let's talk truthfully, shall we?" She perched on the edge of the sofa, clutching her handbag. "It's just David and Clara are facing such hardship, and for you to cut them off, it seems so unnatural, so unlike you." I looked at her, then asked a direct question that hit its mark. "Has Clara asked you for money recently, Margaret?" She flinched, her carefully composed expression cracking for a fraction of a second. "Well, she mentioned some difficulties, yes, nothing specific. Just that things were tight." "Margaret," I said, my voice steady, "David is over $400,000 in debt, $430,000 to be exact. Bad investments, an extravagant lifestyle they couldn't afford. That's why they tried to trick me into signing away Arthur's life insurance at lunch." Margaret's jaw dropped. Her eyes widened, stunned. 400,000? No, that can't be right. Clara never said anything about that much debt. "Arthur documented everything," I said, a subtle gesture toward the study, though I didn't elaborate on the journal. "He saw it all. He knew their intentions. He protected me." I paused, letting the weight of the truth sink in. "I didn't cut them off, Margaret. They cut me off when I refused to hand over my financial security, the legacy Arthur left for me. They chose their greed over family." Margaret stared at me, her face a mixture of shock, dawning comprehension, and a faint flush of embarrassment. The truth, ugly and raw, was finally being laid bare. She stood up slowly, still reeling. I had no idea," she whispered, her voice barely audible. "No idea at all." She left a few moments later, walking stiffly, the weight of the revelation clearly heavy on her shoulders. I watched her go, a mix of sadness and a deep, quiet vindication settling over me. The truth, long buried and carefully protected by Arthur, was finally beginning to emerge, and it was a truth that would change everything. The story isn't over yet, and you won't want to miss what happens next. If you're finding this tale gripping, please show your support by liking this video, sharing it with a friend, and subscribing to my channel so you don't miss any future updates. Your engagement means the world to me. 3 months of silence had solidified into a bleak new normal. The holidays were approaching, usually a time of joyous chaos with David, Clara, and the grandchildren. But this year the prospect was a stark, empty canvas. Without Arthur, and now without them, the festive season loomed like a cruel reminder of what I had lost. I tried to keep busy, finding solace in the mundane tasks of household upkeep. One blustery afternoon, as I was reorganizing a seldom-used linen closet, the doorbell rang. It wasn't the usual polite chime, but a rapid, almost frantic succession of rings. My heart leaped, a mix of hope and trepidation. Could it be David, after all this time? I hurried to the door and pulled it open to find my 12-year-old grandson, Thomas, huddled on my porch. He looked thin, his usually bright eyes shadowed with dark circles, his shoulders slumped. He wore a light jacket that seemed inadequate against the chill wind. My heart twisted with a pain sharper than any other I had felt. "Thomas? My goodness, what are you doing here?" I exclaimed, pulling him inside, wrapping my arms around him. He felt so small, so fragile. He mumbled into my shoulder, his voice muffled. "Mom and Dad don't know I'm gone. Dad's at work, and Mom's at her spa appointment." He'd taken a bus, he explained, nearly an hour's ride across town. My stomach clenched with a fresh wave of anger at David and Clara's negligence. I led him to the kitchen, fussing over him, trying to warm him up. "Are you hungry, sweetheart? Let Grandma make you a sandwich." As I buttered bread and sliced cheese, he sat at the table, his eyes tracing patterns on the checkered tablecloth. Then, his voice barely above a whisper, he confessed, "I miss you, Grandma. Why don't you come over anymore?" His eyes welled up, and a single tear traced a path down his cheek. My heart shattered. I knelt beside him, taking his small hands in mine. "Oh, Thomas, I've missed you so much." I wiped his tear away with my thumb. It's been complicated, honey, grown-up things." He nodded, a solemn, too-old expression on his face. "Mom and Dad fight a lot now," he said, his voice quivering. "About money, and your name keeps coming up." He looked up at me, his eyes wide and innocent. "Dad told me and Emily that you're confused and you're making bad decisions. He said you chose Aunt Sarah over us and you gave her all of our college money." The words were a direct hit, a painful echo of the rumors they'd been spreading. But hearing them from Thomas, seeing the confusion and hurt in his eyes, was a different kind of anguish. I took a deep breath, choosing my words carefully. "Thomas, that's not exactly true, sweetheart. The money your dad is talking about was your Grandpa Arthur's life insurance. He left it specifically to take care of me after he was gone. And I didn't give it to Aunt Sarah. I asked her to keep it safe for me because some people were trying to take it." He listened intently, processing my words. "But Mom and Dad fight all the time," he insisted, his voice cracking. "About bills and credit cards. Dad said we might have to sell the boat and the vacation house. He said it was all your fault." My hand tightened on his. "Thomas, your parents' financial problems aren't because of me. They started long before Grandpa died. And I know it's scary to hear them fight, but I promise you, it's not your fault, and it's not because of me." He looked at me, a flicker of understanding in his eyes, but still burdened. "Dad gets these envelopes," he whispered, "with red stamps on them. He tries to hide them, but I see. Collection notices." My heart ached for this child, caught in the crossfire of his parents' greed and recklessness. He was barely 12, but he carried the weight of a much older person. "Grandma," he whispered, leaning his head against my arm, "can I stay here with you? Just for a little while?" His plea broke my heart entirely. I pulled him into a tight hug, tears stinging my own eyes. "Oh, my sweet boy," I murmured. "I wish you could, more than anything. But we have to call your parents, honey. They'll be worried sick." He pulled back, a bitter, cynical look on his young face. "They won't even notice until dinner," he said flatly. The raw truth in his voice was devastating. I picked up the phone, my fingers trembling slightly as I dialed David's number. It rang several times before he answered, his voice breathless and panicked. "Mom, is Thomas there? He's gone missing. We've been looking everywhere." "He's here, David," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "He's safe. He took the bus here." A wave of relief, quickly followed by anger, colored his tone. "What was he thinking? And why didn't you call us sooner?" he demanded, the familiar accusatory edge returning. "Let me talk to him." I handed the phone to Thomas, who took it reluctantly. I watched his face as he spoke, his shoulders slumping further with each word from his father. When he handed the phone back, his eyes were red-rimmed. "Dad's coming to get me," he mumbled. It was almost an hour later when David's car finally pulled into the driveway. He looked drawn and haunted, his face pale and etched with worry lines I hadn't noticed before. He rushed to Thomas, pulling him into a hug that, despite its urgency, seemed a little stiff, a little forced. As he turned to leave, leading Thomas by the hand, he paused at the door. He didn't meet my eyes, but his voice was low, almost inaudible. "Thank you," he said stiffly, then quickly ushered Thomas out the door. The word hung in the air, unexpected and fragile. It wasn't an apology, not an offer of reconciliation, but it was something. It was the first crack in the wall of silence, a tiny window into a possibility I hadn't dared to hope for. A seed of something new had been planted, however small, however bitter its beginnings. 6 weeks after Thomas's desperate visit, my phone rang. It was David. His voice, for the first time in months, held no anger, only a tentative weariness. He asked to meet somewhere neutral. I suggested the Daily Grind, a small, unassuming coffee shop not far from my house. I needed to see him, to understand, but also to maintain a certain distance, a boundary I had learned painstakingly to draw. When he arrived, he looked thinner, his shoulders slumped. The confident swagger he once carried was gone, replaced by a defeated slump. He ordered a black coffee, his hand shaking slightly as he picked up the mug. "Thomas wouldn't stop asking about you," he began, breaking the tense silence, his voice flat. "He kept asking why Grandma didn't come over. He asked why he couldn't see you." He looked up, meeting my gaze for the first time. His eyes were shadowed, haunted. "I almost didn't call, Mom. Clara's not happy. We're still struggling, worse than ever." "And Clara?" I asked, my voice even, though my heart was pounding. I needed to know if she was still a destructive force in his life, or if she too had seen the light. David's jaw tightened, and he looked away, staring out the window at the bustling street. "I've been an idiot, Mom," he confessed, his voice barely a whisper. "A complete and utter idiot." He took a long, fortifying sip of his coffee. "You know that financial advisor you recommended? Arthur's old one, Mr. Peterson? We finally went to see him." I merely nodded, waiting. I had suggested Mr. Peterson to David months ago, after my initial confrontation, hoping that a professional, outside perspective might penetrate their delusion. "He showed us the numbers," David continued, shaking his head slowly. "Every single detail. He proved that even if we had gotten Arthur's full life insurance, it wouldn't have been a permanent fix. Not for the kind of spending we were doing. It would have been a Band-Aid, a very expensive, very temporary Band-Aid on a gaping wound." He ran a hand through his hair, a gesture of profound exhaustion. "We were bleeding money, Mom, and we didn't even realize how bad it was until Mr. Peterson laid it all out." I reached across the table, my hand briefly touching his. "It's not too late to turn things around, David," I said softly. He looked at me, and a ghost of a smile, fragile and fleeting, touched his lips. "That's what Thomas said." My heart ached at the thought of my grandson, a beacon of hope in this dark time. Then David's gaze dropped to the table, filled with shame. I found Arthur's journal, Mom, in his study." He swallowed hard. "I read it. All of it." The confession hung in the air, heavy with unspoken remorse. "I don't even recognize the son he described, the one constantly asking for money, hiding his debts, letting Clara pry into your finances. It made me sick. It made me realize I've been a terrible son." He looked up, his eyes brimming with unshed tears. "I am so sorry, Mom. For the lunch, for trying to trick you, for the threats, for cutting you off from the children, for everything." His voice broke, thick with emotion. "I accept your apology, David," I said, meeting his gaze directly. It was not easy, but the sincerity in his voice was unmistakable. It felt like a small, tentative step towards healing. He visibly sagged with relief. "I've told the children the truth," he said, his voice regaining a little strength. "Not all the details, but enough. Enough for them to understand that it wasn't your fault. And Emily really wants to see you, Mom. She misses you terribly." My heart soared at the mention of Emily, my sweet granddaughter, whom I hadn't seen in so long. "I miss her too," I whispered, tears blurring my vision. I took a deep breath, knowing this was a crucial moment. The insurance money stays with Sarah, David, I reiterated, my voice firm. That's non-negotiable. To my surprise, he nodded immediately. I understand, Mom. Mr. Peterson said it was the smartest thing you could have done. He said it was protected, that it should remain protected. So what's next for you and Clara? I asked, pushing gently. He sighed. Mr. Peterson suggested bankruptcy, a complete fresh start. But Clara's resisting. She's still worried about appearances, what people will say, losing the country club membership, the lavish vacations. He looked exasperated. Appearances don't pay the bills, David, I stated simply. And a fresh start is worth more than any pretense. I know, Mom. I'm trying to make her see that. He looked at me, a flicker of hope in his eyes. What about you, Mom? Will you help us figure things out? I considered my words carefully. I wouldn't give them money, that much was certain. But guidance, support, and a chance for redemption, that I could offer. I'll help you navigate this situation, David, I said, my voice gentle but clear. With advice, not money. I'll share what I've learned, what Arthur taught me, and you can bring the children to visit anytime. Often, in fact, I paused, adding a crucial condition. And if you commit to this financial recovery, truly commit, then I will consider setting up education trusts for Thomas and Emily, accessible only by them and only for their education. A fresh start for them, untainted by all of this. David's face lit up, a genuine, grateful smile replacing the weariness. Mom, that would be amazing. Thank you so much. He paused, then his smile faltered slightly. Clara isn't yet on board with the bankruptcy idea, but she'll either come around or... He trailed off, leaving the unspoken thread of separation hanging in the air. As we parted ways, David reached out, giving me an awkward, yet heartfelt hug. It was clumsy after so long, but it was real. I'm sorry, Mom, for everything, he whispered into my hair. I held him for a brief moment, a profound sense of closure and cautious hope settling over me. This is a beginning, David, I replied, pulling back, a small smile on my face. Not an ending. The road ahead was still uncertain, but for the first time in a long time, there was a glimmer of light.